And now, Mr. Iván Dibós, IOC member, will give his presentation about principles for good governance. Please applaud Mr. Dibós.
I also want to present my deepest sympathy to the relatives of the boys and girls involved in this accident on the ferry, and as well as to the people of Korea. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be with you in Seoul and to have this opportunity to address an extremely important topic. As a values-based organization, the International Olympic Committee has a particular obligation to set a standard of good governance for the entire Olympic movement. Defining sport governance. While there is no universally agreed definition of sport governance, there have been several attempts to define it. SPARC is a Sport and Recreation New Zealand in year 2004 defined governance as the structure and process used by an organization to develop its strategic goals and direction, monitor its performance against these goals, and ensure that its board acts in the best interest of the members. Also describe governance as the process by which the board sets strategic direction and priorities, sets policies and management performance, expectation, characterizes and manages risks, and monitors and evaluates organizational achievements in order to exercise its accountability to the organization and owners. Another definition is the system by which organizations are directed and managed. Sport Accord defined it as the cornerstone of preserving the autonomy of the sports movement. Ensure that ethical principles and good governance is respected by sport managers, agents, and others in the athletes' entourage. Essentially, governance involves how an organization develops strategic goals and direction, how the board monitors the performance of the organization to ensure it achieves its strategic goals, ensuring the board acts in the best interests of all stakeholders. As I said before, there is no universally agreed definition of governance. The definition identifies the key elements of governance, reinforcing the principle that the board's job is an active one. It also implies a separation of roles between the board and management and highlights aspects of the relations between these two roles. Different boards face different circumstances. For example, in operating environment, stakeholder needs and expectations, organizational complexity and performance, organizational evolution, and personality, experience, and capability of board members and chief executive. These differences are likely to affect the board's role and the approach it will take to its work program. In a sport organization, this might include the process by which committees are selected, monitored, and replaced, the capacity of committees to effectively formulate and implement sound policies, the respect of members for structures and procedures that govern interaction, ensure ethical principles of good governance is respected by sport managers, agents, and others in the athlete's entourage. As proposed by IOC, the principles of good governance are vision, mission, and strategy, a structure of regulations and democratic process, high level of competence, integrity, and ethical standards, accountability, transparency and control, solidarity and development, athletes' involvement, participation and care, harmonious relations with governments while preserving autonomy. The argument is that by governing a sport organization effectively, we are in a better position to manage the performance of its operations and to meet the expectation of stakeholders. The danger is that governance is simply a reinvention of the wheel or the emperor's new clothes. It's just good management for the board. Good governance in international and non-governmental or sport organizations. Only recently, the call for good governance has finally reached the traditionally closed sporting world. This was analyzed by Sugden and Tomlinson in 1998, Cadwalla 2000, IOC 2008, PIET 2011, Council of Europe 2012, European Commission 2012. That this happened in sport much more slowly than in other sectors has to do with the traditional closed, hierarchic self-governance of the sporting world. Nevertheless, in recent years, the quality of self-governance of non-governmental sports organizations has been increasingly questioned due to the commercialization of sport, which painfully expose governance failures such as corruption, bribery, but also made sport subject to the more avaricious and predatory ways of global capitalism. Creates conditions necessary for success. Board plays important role. Board members need the skills and abilities to make strategic decisions. Clear rule for admittance and elections encourage democracy. Board must engage stakeholders through regular communication. Sometimes people arrive to the board, they're the chairman of the board, but they don't know what to do. So we should make sure that they learn. And they should be, for instance, here to learn. Many people of federations, they don't know what it is. And sometimes democracy is good, sometimes it's not. In sport, somebody that gets elected and is not good stays for years and nobody can kick them out. And that's bad for the sport. So there must be some other way to analyze this, which is an active problem right now. For good governance, the board must work to stay informed, provide direction, forge partnerships, monitor and evaluate, manage finance and risk, manage the senior team, are ambassador for the sport and the organization. For bad governance, performance has been attributed to director inexperience, conflicts of interest, failure to manage risk, inadequate or inappropriate financial controls, and generally poor internal business systems and reporting, and most of it has to do with the board and its members, such as lack of training for board members, appointing the wrong people to the board, failing to define the responsibilities of the board and staff, poorly skilled and inexperienced board members, failing to manage the relationship between the board and staff. Governance is not management. The board job is to govern the organization, not to manage it, to see that the organization is well managed without doing the managing itself. They shouldn't do micromanagement. It should simply be called a board, not a board of management or executive. This simply title clarifies the board's proper role to govern without confusing references to management. The board is responsible to the organization, not to individual stakeholders. The board's job is to advance and protect the long-term interests of the organization as a whole, which it holds, its trusts, its members, should be amalgamated and work as a team. Protecting the autonomy of sports is essential for this structure to function effectively. Political interference disrupt sports standards of fair play and impartiality in the enforcement of those standards. This does not mean the sport is beyond the law. It simply means that legal and governmental authorities should recognize the special nature of sport and respect the need for autonomy. The challenge of any organization is to create order out of chaos, and not like this. This should be more in order and not like that goal, which is a chaos. However, it is essential to do that in such a way as to reflect the strengths of the environment within which organizations operate. Conclusions. Board play the most important role for good governance. Must show leadership within the sport organization. Board should be able to demonstrate a planned approach in managing the Olympic sport organizations. Correct application of governance, improved perception of the organization, and good governance will attract private and public funding, facilitating team performance. Thank you very much for your time. And that's the closing ceremony at Sochi, which was beautiful. Thank you very much once again.